Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are very pleased to be able to offer this session today to all of our East Bay districts. My name is Tom Kenworthy, Superintendent of Schools in Portsmouth. Again, this has been a collaborative effort among all of the East Bay districts. Yesterday, we did a similar session for grades PK through 5, and then today the intention is for people in the 6 through 12 grade span. So we are hosting today on our Portsmouth Zoom link and also simultaneously live streaming on our YouTube channel. And this will allow us to also record the session. And so anybody can go back and view at a later time. Yesterday's session is already up there from the recording. So again, welcome and thank you. I'm going to turn things over at this time to Dr. Colleen Germain, who is going to help moderate today and introduce our guest, Dr. Bromage. Colleen?
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Kenworthy. Tom, I appreciate that. And welcome to everyone from the East Bay districts. This is a true collaborative effort. All your superintendents, all of us got together, and we want all of you to know that we're here to support you. And we want to make sure we answer all the questions you have as we go back to school next week. Your health and safety are our #1 priority. And that's why we feel it's really important that you as educators have the opportunity to hear from Dr. Bromage. And also thank you for the questions in advance. And I believe we will be using the live chat if you have additional questions during this session. So I'm going to introduce our honored guest, Dr. Erin Bromage, who is a professor at UMass and has a long resume of great accomplishments. But most importantly of all, he's a person that, in my own opinion, is very caring and understands what all of you are going through, as he also is a professor, he also is a father, and he also knows how scary this time is for everyone. So we deeply appreciate him being here with us and he literally hopped out of his class or got done at 11 o'clock and hopped on the phone and the camera to be with us. So thank you, Dr. Bromage. And I'm going to hand it over to you and let you give the audience a little bit about who you are and what you're all about. So here you go. It's over to you.
So hi, everyone. I just introducing myself and just letting you know who I am and what my motivation is. So I am a professor of immunology and infectious disease, working at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. I live in Westport. I border Tiverton. I'm right there next door to you all. For the last 25 years or so, I have been working on understanding infectious disease, particularly those pathogens that jump from animals to humans and humans back to animals. I run a biosafety level 2 or biosafety level 3 facilities, actually multiple facilities, where we work with pathogens that really, if they get into you, can cause serious damage, such as this particular virus. But we also work with animals that want to bite you and transfer that to you as well. So it's a whole different kettle of fish trying to work out how to do that and do that safely. We have a staff of somewhere between 15 and 30, depending on the year and the amount of research that's being done. The other part of my career, sort of pre this, was I was in engineering and construction and hospitality, spent a lot of time building things and putting things together. And basically what it has ended up being is this perfect confluence of both knowledge of infection, but also the way in which to control and mitigate it, and the engineering controls that we need to make indoor environments safer for us to be in when we're in a pandemic. What I am doing at the moment, and everything's sort of working together, I am both a professor, I am a paid consultant, but not for the schools. Literally anybody local, be it schools, be it businesses, I have volunteered my time 100% for, but I am a paid consultant doing this with state and federal courts around the country, with television and movie production, as well as a couple of the really big companies, banking companies, insurance companies that are bringing literally hundreds and thousands of their employees together. So through them actually paying me, I then am also able to do this and do this for free. And I'm really doing it out of a concern that we are in somewhere new. This is not new for me, but I realize it's new for everybody else. I do work a lot on scientific communication. And so if I can help you understand the risks that we face at work and help give you strategies that you can use at work to keep you safe, that is really my only agenda. 2 months ago, I was really focused on the kids. I did a lot of writing with CNN and with Washington Post about kids in schools. And then I realized fairly quickly that they're not the ones that we need to be worried about. If parents are making that choice of sending their kids to school, they're okay with the risk. But I'm more concerned about the teachers, because if I don't have teachers in the classroom, like you go in and you get infected, we don't have a school anymore. We just have daycare. We just have people looking after other people's kids, and that's not what we want. So my real focus for the last 6 weeks has been on working out ways to work with schools. And I'm really happy that they've done this, because I told them I could not work with a single school because there's not enough time, and that the 8 school districts got together. I can be much more efficient with what we're doing there and can get more information out. So I'm happy that it's happened this way. And then just this morning, my local school district, Dartmouth, they got together all their school nurses, all their IEP teachers, brought them all into an auditorium together, hot auditorium together. And I've just spent the last 2 hours with them. So I apologize, I was late. This starting late was because of me coming back from them. Again, helping them visualize what their day will look like as we're going into the new academic year. So before we open up to questions, I just want everyone to take a step back and think about the ways in which we get infected, because that's the most important thing to understand when we start applying that to your situations at work. So the first way and the easiest way to get infected is a face-to-face conversation with a person that is unmasked and you're under 6 feet away. What comes out of their mouth, those larger droplets, they're called ballistic droplets or respiratory droplets. They come out, they travel, and they drop down to the ground. If those droplets hit your eyes, your nose, or your mouth, and that person is infected, that can lead to an infection in you. So it can be, and I'm not saying that it is more or less, but it can happen as quickly as a single sneeze, 30 seconds. It can take half an hour. You've heard about under 10 minutes, conversations 10 minutes or longer. It's not really based on science. It's based on contact tracing and our ability to, if we were contacting every person that you had a 5-minute conversation with, the net would be huge. So they do 10 or 15 minutes, so the net is not as big. So my point is that a face-to-face conversation with somebody that is unmasked and within 6 feet of you is as high a risk as you can get. That needs to disappear, okay? You need to get rid of that out of your day, because that is a high risk interaction that you don't want to have. How can we control that risk? Well, distance and masks. It is simple as that. If I put a mask on, the droplets don't come out of my mouth and don't hit anybody else. If they've got a mask on, their droplets don't come out and they don't hit me. And if I can't have that, I need 6 feet of distance, because those will come out and hit the ground and never actually land on my face. The next risk that we have with infection is the aerosol or airborne type risk. So think of this, you're wearing a mask, and if you've got glasses on, as you're breathing, they're fogging up. Think of this on a winter's day, you go outside and you breathe and you can see that breath coming out in front of you. In that, they're tiny little droplets, and those tiny little droplets can contain tiny amounts of virus. It's not going to be a way by which you get infected in a minute or 2 minutes. It's like 30 minutes. It's like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Those droplets that are coming out of a person that are infected can build up in the environment in which you are in. So let's think of a classroom. And then the other people in that classroom can be breathing that in over time. And over time, you can end up getting enough virus that leads to you being infected. So let's just think about that for a tick. I'm just going to pick a number. 1,000 viral particles need to get in you to make you sick. A cough or sneeze, you can get all that in one hit. A conversation with a bit of spraying, that can get to you very quickly, a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes. But with this aerosol risk, it's not like you're going to get 1,000 viral particles with a single breath. It may be that you're sitting 6, 8, 10 feet away, and it's building up in the room, and every time you breathe, you take in one. So then you need to take 1,000 breaths in order to get enough virus to get infected. If it is 5 per breath, then it's 200 breaths. Okay, so the amount of virus in the air determines how long you can be in a space safely. So we don't want it to be working on a stopwatch. We don't want to have that because we don't know how much virus is being put into the air. So we need strategies for getting rid of the virus out of the air. The simplest one is wearing masks. Okay, a good mask will cut down about 90% of what I put out. And if I'm infected and I'm putting out 10% of what I would before, that means everybody else can stay in that space for 10 times longer than what it was without a mask. If they're wearing a mask that does good quality filtration on the way in, they can now spend longer in that space before ever becoming infected. That's our first layer of defense, but it can't be our only layer of defense. Our next layer of defense is exchanging or filtering the air inside our space where we are. So we know from many years of studies with influenza that if you're in a classroom and you can just open a window, you can drop influenza transmission down by 50%. Okay, it's that easy to drop it down. But I don't want to rely on the breeze or the weather to determine whether my classroom is safe or not. So what we look at is we want to mechanically ventilate the space that we're in. We want to bring air from the outside in and air from the inside, we want to get it out. And so I know it looks like a low-tech solution, and it is a low-tech solution, but it's a great one. A fan in a window that is blowing the air of your classroom out, and it's bringing air in either through another window or through the hallway door, is as safe as you can get in an indoor space. And just as an example, your classroom, sit there and work out the math of your classroom. The length, the width, the height gives you cubic feet. And so let's say we have a classroom of 10,000 cubic feet. That's a pretty big classroom. And in that classroom, we open a window and we put a Walmart box fan in that window. Now that Walmart box fan, it says on the side of the box, on a high setting, it does 2,000 cubic feet per minute. Our classroom is 10,000 cubic feet. So that means after 5 minutes, I've completely changed out the entire volume of air in that classroom. That means that I am turning over that entire classroom 12 times in every single hour. Our goal is 4. Our achievement is 6. So a box fan just got us twice above what we need to have, and that is great. So box fans do it. Now in your classroom, you might find that you've got a univentilator. So those things that are about hip height that bring air in from the outside. Well, they do a little bit of filtering and they also bring in a little bit of air from outside, but you can get them and set them so they're 100% outside air, and that will provide you with the outside air changes that you actually need from a univentilator. You can also rely on your HVAC system. Some of them you can't, some of them you can. You need to know what you have if you're in those spaces. So the HVAC system can also bring in air from the outside and bring it in. They can be set at 10%, 20, 30, 40% outside air. What you want to be able to do is bring in as much outside air as possible. So the outside air that is coming in, again, is changing over your classroom at least 4 times per hour. You then can look at another layer. It can be a separate layer, which is filtration. if you've got an HVAC system and it has MERV filters in it, which it will, a MERV 8 doesn't help you. A MERV 13 does. So a school that has an HVAC system that has MERV 13 filters installed in it, that is turning over your classroom 6 times per hour, doesn't need the windows open. Do it anyway, but it doesn't need them open, because as we're filtering it through that MERV filter, it's stripping the virus, the little respiratory droplets, out of the air and providing a safe, clean indoor environment. So you can end up with a system where you've got MERV 8s in it, but they're giving you 50% fresh air with every air exchange. That can be safe. You can be having a school that has only 10% outside air, but going through MERV 13 filters. That can be safe. You can have it from a univentilator, as long as we're getting 4 to 6, that can be safe, or a box fan in the window. So we've got all those options. The last one that we try to put in, if we can't do those, is that's when we get to HEPA filters. So HEPA. So a HEPA filter will filter the virus out of the air. And you need to make sure that you're getting at least 4 air changes per hour. Again, read the box of the HEPA filter. If it says it's doing 300 cubic feet per minute and your classroom is X size, divide it into it and work out how much it's turning over the classroom. Some huge classrooms may need 2. Some may only need 1. Some spaces only need a small one. So that takes care of our air environment, is either ventilation or filtration. The final way of getting infected is through touch. And I'm not talking handshaking. It's sort of sad that that's gone out of the day. A handshake doesn't infect you. A handshake where you rub your eyes is the thing that leads to infection. So what we're looking at is if you touch a surface that's contaminated, a hand, a child's snot, cry, whatever it needs to be, a door handle, an elevator button that has infectious material on it, you are not infected until you eat food, until you rub your nose, until you rub your eyes. If that brings enough of the virus to those spaces, you can lead to infection that way. It is much harder to infect yourself that way. And at most, we're looking at about 5% of all infections happen through contact, through fomites. And it's quite simple to protect yourself. Wash your hands often, sanitize your hands often, and don't touch your face. Okay, that, as simple as that sounds, that is the way to protect yourself against those. Washing your hands, sanitizing your hands, and not touching your face keeps you protected. So when we start thinking about your workday and getting into your work environment, we need to think about the 3 ways of getting infected. The most important way to protect yourself is masks on you and masks on students. We do that, we take care of 2 risks, both the aerosol risk and the droplet risk. We lower them way, way down. We then add distance. The more distance that we put between us and them, the lower the risk again. And then add ventilation, lower the risk even further. And by layering those 3 things on top of each other, we start to make an environment that is much safer to be indoors for an extended period of time. Now, would I be asking you or telling you that this is safe in an environment where we have huge, high community transmission? No. I mean, plain and simple, there are spots in this country and even spots in Rhode Island where it doesn't necessarily look safe to go back right now, because we're looking at maybe 1 student every 2 or 3 classrooms might be infected. In most of our districts, especially the districts in the southern part of Rhode Island, the southern part of Massachusetts, the communities have done exactly what they need to do to help us open schools in a safe fashion. And I'll use the numbers just from my local schools that are near me, so Westport and Dartmouth. Dartmouth is having an average of 4 cases in 36,000 people of their population every week. So if I take that down to a school number of 1,000 kids in the school, it looks like if we just use those numbers, we will have 1 single child in that entire school of 1,000 every month, not every week, not every day, but once in a month, we will have an infected child in that school. So while we have to work like everybody is infected, we also need to appreciate the risk that if our community has done the right thing for us, the chances of an infected person being in your classroom are really quite low. If community transmission increases, we need to really rethink what we're doing in our spaces, whether it is wise to have as many students in the classroom as we have. Should we be remote? Should we be hybrid? Should we be elevating the amount of PPE that we're using? Should everyone be in gowns? But at this stage in the classes that the school districts that I'm looking at and working with, and you need to make that assessment for yourself. If you're in a good zone with low community transmission, you know that your community has done right, and now you still need to be guarded in your space. You still need to work a little differently, but understand that everybody, the risk in your classroom, in your school is actually quite low. So with that, I will stop and we will open it up to questions, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we humanly can.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Bromage. All right, the first question from teachers: should all classrooms have fans?
So a fan is actually a no for me, because if the fan is the only thing that you have in there, it's just blowing whatever is in the classroom around. If you have, we're looking for ventilation, which means air from the outside coming in. If you're talking about a fan in the window bringing air in or blowing air out, sure. But if we're talking a box fan over in the corner of a room and nothing else, no. If we're talking a fan in the window bringing air in and then other fans in the classroom just to move air around, sure. But fans in the classroom, if they're not bringing air into your space, are not a mitigation help, and they're actually probably blowing it to other people in the classroom. Think about it from the point of view of completely still air and someone up in the front of the class smoking a cigarette. The people closest to them will get the highest amount. The people in the back might smell it a little bit, but they're not getting a lot. If we put a fan in there and distribute it all around, we now have everyone hitting the same dose. Okay. If I have somebody smoking a cigarette and I've got a box fan right beside them blowing the air out of the room, nobody smells it. That's what we're trying to do.
Okay. The next question is, are experiments and/or STEM-inspired challenges where students would need to use materials the teachers provide okay to conduct in the classroom?
Yeah, so we have to be concerned about the fomite risk. It's low, but let's make sure that we're not adding any risk to what we're doing. So let's think about, first of all, just handing out papers to students. How do I do this safely? Print it out the day before, put it on your desk, and don't touch it till the next day. Okay, virus on paper only lasts about 30 minutes to a few hours. Then the next day, before you hand it out, sanitize your hands and then hand it out to the students. Okay, that's completely safe to hand that out to them. Now they need to hand it back to you. So now how do we do that and be safe? We can't expect them to be sanitizing or not have their dog drool on it or whatever. So we need to work out how is it safe for you. Have a basket at the front of your classroom. Have your students come and put that paper into that basket, into that box, and then don't touch it till the next day. Okay. It takes longer to do your grading. You're not going to turn it around as fast as you did before, but give it overnight. Let nature do its thing and inactivate the virus if it's there. And then you now know you can pick it up and work with it in your home or in your class and know that it's safe from an infection standpoint to you. Okay. So you're going to be a little slower. You're going to be not as efficient. But that is, I mean, it's what we're doing in courthouses where people from the public come in and submit things to the court. They receive it, they stamp it, they put it to the side, they sanitize their hands immediately, and then they don't touch it again until the next day. And then they can handle it as they did before. Now, if we're talking about materials, the harder one here is a microscope. Okay. The days are gone where a student was looking down a microscope and then they say, you know, hey, Dr. Bromage, can you come and help me with this? And then I come and bring my eyes down onto it. Yep, nope, not happening. Okay, you need to come up with a different way of doing it. I don't want to get onto shared pieces of equipment. For me, keeping myself safe, I don't want that. But again, if you're handing things out, be it beakers, be it, any sort of experimental stuff that you're working with or any classroom materials, if you want to keep yourself, the students safe from you, sanitize your hands before you touch it and then hand things out. If you want to keep yourself safe from them, when they bring it back and you need to put things away, do it. Just be mindful not touching your face. And when you're done with that, sanitize your hands or wash your hands, and then you're good.
The next question is, do we need to have air sanitizers or purifiers, UVC lights for our classrooms?
So anywhere we can avoid using UVC, we want to. UVC, unfortunately, there is a lot of, I'm going to call them parasites. There's a lot of companies jumping in and putting these things in, and UVC that is done incorrectly puts out ozone, and ozone is an absolute health hazard in an enclosed space. So please don't, please don't, because they're not great. There are other strategies that are cheaper and are as effective that you can put in that space. So again, our first thing that we always want to go to is ventilation. That can be through the HVAC system, or it can be through fans in windows or opening windows up, or go outside. Take advantage of the good weather that we have. Well, not today, but the good weather that we have this time of the year to go outside. Ventilation is first and foremost. Filtration is our next one. And we can layer ventilation and filtration together. The only time that we need to put a HEPA filter into a classroom is if we can't get ventilation or filtration from another system. If we can't get to that 4 to 6 air changes per hour through ventilation or appropriate filtration, we need to go to HEPA filters to provide that protection for an indoor space. So if I am in an indoor classroom that has no windows and a single door, I don't really look at blowing air from the hallway in as being overly safe. It could be, but why? If I have no univentilator in that room that's bringing it in, and I have no HVAC system, I then look at that space and say, I have no ventilation, I have no air filtration. Is this a space that I should be using? Now, if it's a space that must be used, we cannot use it. And I will say this plainly, you cannot use it for anything other than a single occupancy without one of those things during a pandemic. So what we need to do is we need to put into that space a HEPA filter that will turn it over 4 to 6 times per hour. There really is, and in my opinion, during a pandemic, there really is no choice with that in a multi-user space. So the only time then I think that an indoor classroom can't be used, and it may mean we have to invest $500 into that classroom. If we can't do that, in my opinion, that room becomes storage or somebody's office. Okay, a single person in there, your only risk is to yourself. And if you're infected, you're already infected. So when we look at spaces, ventilation, filtration, or supplemental filtration, there has only been one classroom that I have been in all the schools that I've been to where we haven't been able to do ventilation, filtration, or supplemental. It had a single power outlet in there, and that was dedicated to the teaching resource, and there was no more power. There was nothing we could do. So that then just became a storage space for excess furniture.
Okay. The next question, and it's from my hometown. Our high school in Newport was identified by state inspectors as being the worst condition of any school building in Rhode Island. This is when they did the reports on schools. We have no HVAC and our heating system is unreliable, complicating it year round. Is it possible for a building to be unsuitable for COVID risk mitigation efforts at a sufficient scale?
Okay, so I'll use an example. I mean, my kid's school is not in the same state as that. I don't know what it is, but let's say that it really is that way because I've heard that a couple of times. My children's school is 100 years old. It does not have HVAC at all. And my kids are at school full time. Why? Well, they were able to de-densify the classroom. So they had fewer students in the space, still not good enough. I think you can put kids at 3 or 4 feet apart if the community transmission's low, if we're taking care of all the other bits that we need with ventilation and filtration. So what they did was they had windows in, I think, 90% of the classrooms. They took the approach of sash-mounted window fans. They put them in every classroom that could. Now, some classrooms only had a 6 or 9-inch window opening. They found small sash-mounted fans and they put more of them in there to create more airflow. And then when we had ones that really didn't open well at all, the maintenance person got really creative and actually got a box fan and put a duct onto it, and then got the duct and squeezed it through the opening and just had it sort of ducted and going out. And they sat down and worked out, okay, we can do that. They also had univentilators in the spaces as well. And it doesn't matter if that univentilator is 50 years old. I'd actually prefer the older ones, because the older ones you adjust manually. And if I can adjust them manually, I can open them up wide. As in, I go out and I flip them down, I open up the economizer. And so now it's just bringing in outside air in, and it's just dumping into the classroom. So they were able to do that as well. But we know that that type of approach only gets us through until the weather outside is not what we want to be bringing inside. And so that may be 8 weeks, it may be a little bit longer. And so we then have to work on the next strategy for the school. So they don't have the final strategy in place, but they're working on the next strategy for the school, which is getting that supplemental filtration in those classrooms. And I'm almost certain the way that this is going to happen, and it's not going to happen from the school itself, it's going to happen from fundraising with the Parent-Teacher Association and parents. So I think that that's the way that our school's going to go with that. I did get with another school district. So Westport, for example, they had COVID mitigation money. They were about to spend quite a lot of money on bringing in extra custodial staff. But after speaking to them and saying, rather than cleaning everything, let's keep doors open so we don't have to clean this. We know the risk from this, so let's not spend as much money there. Let's spend more money on air filtration. And so these schools are set for being torn down in a year. So that gives you an idea of where they are in regards to quality. And what it ended up being was through the town, the school district, and the Parent-Teacher Association, with some funds that they had, they banded together and they literally bought enough HEPA filters for every classroom to put in there. So now they didn't all arrive. They start school on Monday. They did not all arrive. We got 50. And so what we did was we focused them on the K through, we could only do K through 1. Because the second grade is our largest grade in this school district. We couldn't get it together in time. So we put them hybrid for now till the next lot of resources came in. And we're working from the ones that can't be as effective online to the ones that are not overly effective but can work. So we're working our way towards the high school. So what they did is they got enough HEPA filters for every classroom to meet the minimum of 4. And in some cases, we exceeded that because putting 1 in exceeded that space with what it needed. And that was a real joint effort between both the Parent-Teacher Association, the town, and the school district, allocating that as something that was critical for us to be teaching beyond the end of October. And that gets us through winter. If everything goes well, the community does right. So I will not and do not advocate for teaching in a classroom that does not have ventilation, filtration, or supplemental filtration. It doesn't need to be all 3. It doesn't need to be 2. It needs to be 1, but we need to meet that standard of 4, preferably 6 as we go through.
So Dr. Bromage, I'm just going to follow up for clarification. Are you saying as long as you have the air exchange in buildings like that, that it is acceptable until the weather turns, meaning it's going to get very cold or whatnot, and then you need to have those HEPA filters in there because you won't be able to have the fresh air exchange?
Yeah, so if the weather outside dictates that you need to close the windows, and I don't know what temperature that is. It could be different for, I mean, if it's 40 degrees outside, my windows are still open.
Same here.
But I don't want to put my own personal things on everyone else. If it gets to the stage where it becomes uncomfortable indoors and you can't put on enough clothes to be warm, then I know we will hit that at various times in the year. So right now, blowing air from the outside in is going to be humid. I'm sorry, if we're doing this, suck it up. Would I do this with my own kids? My kids went to school in raincoats today because they've taken the approach, the school has taken the approach that only lightning and a hurricane will make them go inside. That's it. And so we pulled up today, it's raining in Dartmouth. The teachers are in like yellow rain jackets. Things that they did over summer was they built outdoor tables for the teachers. They built outdoor chalkboards for the teachers. The teachers came together, did a big Home Depot shopping, and they built these things. And then every kid has to bring their own chair, and they sit them 10 feet apart on a dedicated space. That is their space to be for their classes where they're teaching. And it's only going to be in severe adverse events where they're going inside. So if you can be outside, great, but they know they will have to go inside at some stage. They will go in. We know the classrooms are ventilated. That gives us another month. But again, when we hit December, for example, maybe we have to start closing the windows. We need to be not waiting till December to do this. We need to get the strategy in place for when we do need to close the windows, when there really is no choice, that we have the next, like the defense there. So do we need it now? No, if we've got ventilation or filtration. If we know we have to do like cut them off later, we need to have a next layer of defense come.
Thank you. The next question is, how can we assess air exchange and or filtration in our rooms? Is it true that 2 open windows plus a box fan or 2 provide sufficient air exchange? Okay.
Yep. So trust me, but verify. Okay. So what I do and what I recommend that you do, hit up your school to buy a carbon dioxide meter. Okay. You only need 1, maybe 2 of them for the entire school, just so that you can get around them in enough time. And if you are planning on having 15 students in that space, put 15 adults, get 15 teachers in there and masked, and then put that CO2 meter away from a person, but away from the window. So sitting sort of somewhere centrally, but not having the cheat of fresh air blowing in on it all the time, or the detriment of someone breathing on it all the time. And put that in there and just spend half an hour in that classroom. That CO2 meter will read the level of carbon dioxide in the air in that space. Outside air is 400 parts per million. I breathe air out at somewhere around 32 to 36,000 parts per million. So what we're looking at is trying to work out how much of the air we are breathing in is rebreathed. And we do that by the amount of carbon dioxide that's in that space. So if I've got, and it's rough numbers, but it's just so that you can get an idea. If I have a carbon dioxide meter, I have my class at full occupancy, and I am sitting on 800 parts per million, and that's where it's sitting. I know I have roughly 4 air changes per hour. If that drops down to 700, I know I have about 5 air changes per hour. And if that drops down to 600 parts per million, I know I have 6 air changes per hour. So if they're the sort of numbers, if I see it at 800 or higher, that would suggest I don't have the ventilation that I require to turn my classroom over regularly. Now, I will throw in a caveat with that. If you are working in a building that has MERV 13 filters, or if you're working in a classroom that has a HEPA filter in there, the carbon dioxide is going to be higher because you're not relying on ventilation to provide you with the protection, you're using filtration. But if you are relying on univents, if you're relying on MERV 8 filters, if you are relying on windows open and box fans, we want to be below 800. Now, if you put 10 or 15 adults into that space and you find it sitting on 800 and you start throwing in 14-year-olds, it's going to be lower than 800. Adults put out more than children. So you're stress testing at a higher level by putting adults there. So trust me that it works, but verify yourself that it is working. So again, if my school had told me that the univentilator in my classroom is giving me more than 6 outside air changes per hour, great. But I want to know it's working. I want to verify this myself. I tie some ribbons, some streamers on the univentilator so I can see that it's blowing air. I know it's working, but then I put that CO2 meter in there in my classroom and I monitor it and I look at it. And if it doesn't get above 800, it is doing what you know is meant to be done to look after that aerosol risk. If it gets above 800, it's where you then go and knock on your super's door or your principal's door and say, we have an issue. I would like this to be addressed. Is it urgent? Not necessarily right now because the infection rates are so low, but we want to get it fixed quickly so that we're not relying on substandard air to keep us safe. So test it out. And I promise you with box fans, you get a great airflow, but just trust but verify. So I would walk that around different classrooms and I would test them out and just know what I've got. If I'm not feeling it's great, put it in that classroom and then you'll know what you have.
Okay, the next follow-up is, if we got portable HEPA filters, how do we know the best way to set them up? And why would we open buildings before fans and purifiers are in place?
So if you open up windows and have HEPA filters in there, you're filtering outside air, and that's wasteful. Not only wasteful in the sense that you're actually deteriorating the quality of the HEPA filter. Because you're bringing dust from outside, you're bringing particulates from outside. And if you're getting the exchange rate that you need from outside air through windows that are mechanically ventilated, we don't want to have the HEPA filter on. It might provide a little bit of a bump, but what it will end up doing is when you have to close that window, it's not going to be working at its optimum that it would be if it didn't have that strain on it from the last 6 or 8 weeks. So HEPA filters. HEPA filter in a classroom, if we're thinking of positioning it correctly, is off the floor, about hip height-ish, in the center of a classroom. Now, I realize that probably is not going to be a realistic spot because it means an extension cord coming. It may create a different hazard that's there, but that is about the best spot that you can put it. If we can't put it there and we're doing it somewhere safe, you put it in the middle, but off to the side of the classroom against the wall with the air drawing in and the discharge going up and over. If you've got a HEPA and a ceiling fan or a box fan just moving air around, that's just fine. But a HEPA filter, again, balance it out that it's meeting the entire space of that classroom, at least 4, preferably 6 times per hour.
Okay. According to the NFHS and REMA, students are able to sing and play instruments both indoors and outdoors while wearing masks and appropriately distanced. Our district is telling us that we will not be able to sing or play at all indoors. Could you please share your scientific opinion on whether singing and etc. should be allowed or not?
Okay, so let's deal with musical instruments. Bang your drum, your glockenspiel, any of those non-woodwind instruments, all you like. I mean, that is no different from a normal classroom. Guitar, no worries. If we start getting to woodwind instruments, if we start getting to brass, if we get to piccolo and flute, please don't, especially piccolo and flute, clarinet as well. The act of breathing across aerosolizes the droplets much more than what we get just with normal breathing. And it creates a much greater risk if that child was infected. So there are certain instruments that should just go up on a shelf. And obviously, if they're playing one of those, they're not masked. So, we have that problem. Now, I have seen some creative solutions to trumpet, trombone. They're putting essentially a mask on the end of them. And I think that's really neat and really cool. I'm not sure the efficacy of it, but I saw one doctor actually that I did a webcast with. He plays the trumpet, and no, he plays the trombone, sorry. And he put a mask over the end of it. And so anything that was coming out was being caught on the mask. Didn't sound the same, but it was the way that he could actually play his instrument was by doing that. I don't think that there is a similar thing that you can do with a flute or a piccolo, maybe a clarinet, to drop that risk down. So music is not ruled out if it's not aerosolizing things and people can wear masks. So singing. If we had this discussion a month ago, I would tell you that there is absolutely no way in the world I would be in an indoor space with people singing at all. I can't get my head around it, because all the big, not all, a lot of the large outbreaks that have happened around the world have centered around people singing or shouting, be it the choirs, be it the churches. There was just an outbreak in New Bedford associated with the church and the services. I see it over and over again. Now, the reason I say if it was a month ago, the data has changed a little bit. I'm still not comfortable with it. The data has changed to say that if you wear a good mask and you are singing, the risk goes from singing is up here, whereas breathing is down here. If you're wearing a good mask, you can drop this down to here. Okay. Now, it's one study, and I can tell you it will be very dependent on what that one mask is. If we're wearing a very basic mask, rather than being down here, it's going to be here. If we're wearing a better mask, it might be down here. So I wouldn't want my safety and the safety of other people in my space to be dependent on the quality of the mask that somebody is bringing from home or their parents found wherever. I would want to see more data on this before I could tell you that it's safe to do indoors. Is it safe to do outside? Hell yes. Get your chorus, get your choir, get whoever it is, get them outside, get them in a line with the breeze coming to their face, no one behind them, instructor 10 feet away, and make them face forward. We don't want them to project sideways, face forward, and just sing and sing and sing. That is not perfectly safe, but that is outdoor safe, which we know 20 times or more greater in regards to safety than being indoors. So I don't want to see music go. I don't want to see theater go. But if we're going to do this and sing, take them outdoors. The teacher should still probably wear a mask, potentially a face shield if they're getting anywhere near them. But I think having 10, 15, 20 kids lined up singing so that they're not in a line with the wind blowing down over the top of them, but they're in a line with the wind just blowing into their face, ends up being a safe thing to do. If the indoor environment changes and we get better information on masks, I will let you know. There are some great masks that are coming out that are being designed with theater companies, with opera companies on ways to do this. And they actually come across here and they billow out and then come around your neck and create a big space so that you can project. They look like they're going to be great. We may get there, but at this stage, I don't feel comfortable that singing indoors, even masked right now, is something that my own comfort level would be accepting of. But that's going to be based on data and what comes out.
Okay. Our next question is, working with behavior and special needs students, how do we restrain, if necessary, with social distancing and following CDC guidelines?
Right. And so when I heard about this, I mean, the thought that you have to restrain in school kills me. And I'm sorry, I didn't know that as a parent. And my heart breaks a little bit that that's part of the school day in general for anyone, a child or a teacher. But okay, it happens. So how do we deal with it? You got to think about risk to start off with. A risk is going to be a face-to-face interaction with this. I realize that if that student is presenting themselves at danger or putting someone else, you don't really have a choice about how you get into that situation to control it. If you do have that choice, approach from behind, the face away, approach from a greater height if you possibly can. But obviously that first level of safety becomes important, which is stopping the risk of that happening, the interaction happening. So then we've got to think about yourself. So anybody that is in this situation needs to have a good quality mask, not a home mask, not a t-shirt mask, not a bandana mask, a good quality mask, a type 1 surgical mask, 2, 3, whatever you have access to. Not a big fan of a KN95 because a KN95 in a situation where you're physically restraining somebody, the mask shape is much stronger. And so if your face hits them, your mask gets ripped off. Whereas if you're wearing a type 3 surgical mask, there's no surface for it to grab other than hooking. So if we need to provide restraints, you need to have a good mask and you need to have eye protection, period. You just must have them. And I'm not talking a shield because a shield can be used as a weapon or can be used to move your head. So no, it needs to be a pair of glasses, safety glasses, sports glasses, chemical goggles. I don't care what you have access to, but they need to be right here on you at any given stage so that if you need to step in, you need to pause for a second, drop them down, and then step in. And that doesn't mean even if it's a physical, if it's a kid crying, if you're having to provide attention, it needs to be exactly the same thing. Stop, glasses on, come into that space. Now, I can't help you with the 6 feet. If you've got to come into the 6 feet, you've got to do it. You're falling within that contact tracing guidelines anyway. But we need to make sure that the interaction is as safe as it can be. Good mask, eye protection. I need to keep my head away from their head. Okay, so I know the kids we're talking about are a little bit older, but when I'm talking to children that are younger, I usually get down on their level. Nope, no more. I talk from up high. If I'm coming in to approach someone and I have to come from in front, okay, that's the way it needs to be. But if I can approach from the side, even better. If from behind, 100% better again. And basically what I'm trying to do with whatever restraint that I'm allowed to use is my head and their head need to be facing the same direction. So if I've got them from behind, their head is face, or their head's facing off to the side, I don't want their face to be in mine. I wouldn't want that if I was restraining them anyway, because I could just think of what would happen to my own face. Get your head out of their zone. And again, I'm terrified that I'm thinking of these things, like of having to do that, but that's what you need to think about. We need to keep a face that is shouting, that is unmasked, away from this. So if that needs to be from behind, from the side, where I put my head behind their head and protect it, it needs to be. I can't even visualize what you need to do with this. I'm having a trouble with it, but that's the general philosophy that we want to go in with.
Thank you. The next question is it safe to teach in a carpeted room?
Yeah, so a carpeted space, there is a theoretical increased risk with that virus that lands on the floor could end up being resuspended and put back up into the air. But let's think about how much virus ends up on the floor. If we've got masks off and we're singing, everything that comes out goes up into the air, drops down onto the floor, and it does build up on that space over time. There's no doubt about that. But if we've got mask use, if we've got a relatively quiet classroom and we've dealt with the ventilation or filtration, the amount of particulates or particles that are ending on the floor are so much less than they ever were in the past. So we've lowered the risk way, way down. So where does our risk come into it? And it's not necessarily sitting on the floor. I actually think the greater risk comes to the person who vacuums that space, because when we vacuum that space, we literally are bringing it up and we are suspending it at that time. I know the vacuum that I have has a HEPA filter in it. It's built into it. That's the type of vacuum that we want to have in a space that has carpet. We don't want to be working with a bagless vacuum. We want to be a bagged vacuum that has, the proper fitting filters in it, because we don't want to be resuspending that risk to the custodian or the teacher or whoever cleans that space afterwards. So I'm not too concerned about a carpeted classroom with masks and good ventilation and filtration.
Okay, so the next question, if properly distanced and wearing masks, 3 parts. Can students move in classrooms, for example, to the whiteboard?
Yeah.
Can students turn and face one another?
Yeah. So it depends. Well, if you can guarantee that you're maintaining the distance and your masks, then that's great. I mean, really, that is great. I don't know I think every school, I asked the governor this about what the plan was for schools in regards to contact tracing and quarantine. And the answer was, it was every school developed their own plan and either submitted it or did something. So I realized there's not a universal standard. In a classroom where if somebody tests positive and everybody is going to be quarantined after that, then if you've got mask use and distancing, even if we lose the distancing a little bit, it doesn't affect contact tracing at all because they're all going to go down anyway. But when I think about how I would design a classroom if I was in that space and I still wanted to have students being able to move and have some relatively normal interactions, what would I do? So I would have my desk at the front of the classroom. I would have a buffer of at least 6 feet at the front of the classroom, preferably more. So I would rather have a desk pushed all the way to the back wall than I would have a space at the back of the classroom. Because if I can create space up the front, it makes it safer for me, but it also makes it safer for everybody else. Why? Because who's the biggest risk to the classroom? It's the teacher. It's the person who's speaking. The person who's speaking is putting out about 75 times more respiratory droplets, more aerosols than anybody else. So if I can keep that teacher away, then I've created it safer for the students. So then I've got this buffer up the front of my classroom. Do I want to, as the teacher, then to be walking down to a student? Nope, because I have the chance of all these interactions that are happening on the way down. I would rather organize my classroom so that the student comes to me and I only have that one semi-close interaction. So if you can create that good environment where the student can come up and talk to you and keep a 6-foot buffer. One of the schools I got in, we had this teacher's desk. This teacher stood behind the desk. We put a dot on the floor, stand here if you want to talk to Dr. Bromage. And so now we knew we had it at 6 feet, and that's how the interaction happened. That student comes up and now I only have a single interaction. But if that student's coming up to work on the board, again, let them come up. That student can work creatively, putting what they need to up on the board, and we have a 6 feet distance. And again, the teacher stands off to the side. The great part about doing that as well, if we can have the distance and the masks and that buffer up the front, you can consider, and again, you need to work this out with your school district, you can consider zoning off an area up the front of that classroom with an 8-foot by 8-foot square, mark it out with tape on the ground. And a student then in the course of the day can come up to that space, stand in that space in the very far corner of it, take their mask off, have a drink of water quietly, no talking, take a drink of water, put their mask back on, and then come back to their bench. What you've now allowed them to do is take a brief mask break, get some water, but you've designed it in a way that is now safe. Okay, so they're the things that if you've got the space to be able to do it, and you've got the willingness of the Department of Health and your school district to do those things, you can create safe classroom spaces where students can interact, but there's also that opportunity to get a little bit of normalcy, like a drink of water, like a mask off for a few minutes.
Okay. All right, this will be, I'm just giving Dr. Kenworthy a heads up. I'll do this last one, and then I think we need to go to the chat. And we're back at Rogers High School again. Rogers High School is in deplorable condition.
Is that the Newport classroom school?
That's the Newport school. We're notorious for this.
Sorry.
That's okay. There isn't any ventilation, air conditioned HVAC. It has also been infested with mold, mildew, and has had a rodent problem in the past. It was and is named the worst school facility in the state. How can people be allowed to enter, much less work there? And what are your recommendations in order to mitigate any circumstances there? I think you have addressed it, but
Wow,
you can see it's on everyone's mind.
that's throwing a curveball. So again, I know there's going to be a whole bunch of people cringe at this. If we don't have ventilation or filtration or the ability to do that, we should not be in those spaces during a pandemic, period. Okay, so we then, if we can't do that, then we can't use it. But as I said, out of all the places I've been, there has only been one classroom in one school that we haven't been able to sort out through, and I'm sorry, money, okay, money and time. So I'm not talking about, there has not been a government or a private business that I've worked with that has changed their air handling units or installed air conditioning. That's just not in people's budgets. So we need to get more creative about the solutions that we have. And that's where, I mean, it needs to be fans. It needs to be portable filtration. The one thing I will keep going back to it is if we can't get ventilation or filtration from what the school has, we need to get it in from a portable standpoint, and that's those HEPA filters. The thing I love about the HEPA filters is if you decide to decommission that school in a year's time, they can all go up and go into somebody's office. They can be sold. You can get half of your money back at the end of it. They should have a good 5-year, preferably 10-year lifespan if they're looked after well. They're not a one and done. They will help you with influenza season. They will help you with allergy season. They will help you with so many other bits and pieces. And it's why I advocate for them in the absence of ventilation and filtration, is because it's not just a pandemic reduction, risk reduction. It can help with many other things where people have allergies, asthma, dust, pollen, all those things that we can take care of. So they have a use beyond the pandemic. They're certainly not cheap, but that's there. So my hard line with this would be, if we have community transmission in Newport, I don't know if we do, and you can't do ventilation or filtration, we should not be using those spaces. If we do not have community transmission in Newport, then we should be back in them, even though it's terrible, as long as we haven't created a bigger problem, which is beyond my skill set, of mold and rodents and things like that. Like, we need to mitigate those. But if we can mitigate and add extra layers in there, then if Newport is doing what it needs to do and keeping community transmission low, we are providing the right air environment for us to be able to teach in a safer manner.
And just for clarification, that can be translated into having the box fans in the window, fresh air in and fresh air, old air out, just for clarification.
Yeah, so again, my perfect pandemic setup when we can't spend $100,000 on, well, more, $250,000 on a central HVAC system for a single story school is, I'm assuming a school of a very long hallway, front doors, maybe back doors. Is those front doors wide open? I know you can't for security, but this is just in my head. Front doors wide open, classroom doors wide open, box fan in window, and we've just got the air being sucked from the front door down through the hallway, out through each classroom and out. That way I'm making the hallways safer, I'm making the classroom safer, and I'm actually making a better learning environment because I'm not dealing with carbon dioxide buildup inside my spaces. This is not just a pandemic issue. If we can ventilate, you'll actually have better memory, better attention, better retention of knowledge, people less, so you'll have all those things going for you. So that's where I think about that. I had one school that couldn't open the front door because of security. What they were able to do in a couple of central windows, they pulled them out and they put louvers in there that were always open. That was where the air dumped in for the central part of the school. If we can't use the hallways as ventilation, we open 2 windows, one with a box fan, the other one for makeup air coming in. So it's just about exchanging the air in that classroom out.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kenworthy for questions from the chat.
Sure thing. So I've been monitoring the chat, trying to bundle questions, and some have come up already throughout the discussion, but just wanted to hit on some of the ones that are a little bit different. So a couple questions about teachers in some districts being told they cannot keep their classroom doors open. And you know, I don't know if that varies from district to district based on fire or marshal recommendations, but what is your recommendation in that case?
Okay, so if there is a security reason, if there is a fire reason, I understand the security. The fire one, I think you should have a talk to the fire marshal to work out if there can be a pandemic waiver. And if there can't, then if it needs to be closed, it's a lower choice option, but door closed with 2 windows will work. The reason why I don't like that as much as the door, like again, if we're looking at this from ventilation, if I've got a door in one corner and I can put the fan in the far corner away from it, I'm ventilating the entire space, drawing air all the way through and exchanging it. There's no dead spots. If I open 2 windows on one side of the classroom, I get more ventilation closer to the windows than I do on the far side. And it's really working at the margins at that stage about, is it really riskier on the other side of the classroom? Well, maybe a little bit, but it's not significantly, different with that. But we want to have air exchange. What we don't want is a single window with a fan out and no way for fresh air to get in. So if all the other windows are closed and the door's closed, the only way fresh air can get in is the bottom crack of your door, and that won't give you the ventilation that we're after.
Okay. So there's a couple of questions. Do you have a recommendation on whether teachers should be removing their clothing that they've been wearing throughout the day, or shoes, or showering right away when they get home after a day in school?
Yeah, so we were doing that with people in ICU that were working in emergency rooms. They were either changing clothes at work or doing the naked run when they get home. And when I say that, is a lot of my old students and my friends, they would call up their kids or call up their spouse and say, I'm 5 minutes away from home. The family would then open every door from the garage all the way up to the bathroom. The person would come home, the garage door would go down, they would rip off clothes except for underwear, put that into a laundry basket and run upstairs to the shower. They would throw their stuff into the laundry basket, shower, and then they'd come down and say hello to their family. But they're guaranteed to be exposed to the virus at work. Okay, I mean, they're working in a condition where they expect to be exposed. Where we are now, and we are going back, I do not expect to be exposed to the virus at work. Okay, if I'm going in with that realistic expectation that that's going to be the case, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. But our community transmission data does not suggest that at all. So we should not be going in with that mindset. We should work under the mindset that there is somebody infected, but we also should have the realistic expectation that there's likely not. So where would I change my clothes, or when would I change my clothes? For the vast majority of teachers, nope, this is just something that you're wasting mental effort on that you don't need to do. Focus it on some higher order activity. But for somebody that needs to deal with bodily fluids of a human, so I tend to think of kindergarten, changing a diaper where we ended up with a mess, a nurse that had a coughing, spluttering kid put on them and I wasn't wearing a gown, those type of things, then yet we might want to look at having a change. If I was a K-2 teacher that I had a significant other at home that was high risk, then I would think about changing clothes. And you can take different levels. So we could just have a spare set of clothes. When I'm done for the day, I take them off, I put them in a laundry basket and I jump into them. And that way I know I've lowered the risk through my clothes. You could take it to a higher level, take extra clothes in. Most schools we've closed up the gyms. So the teachers then have access to the gym. They go in and shower, change into new clothes, go home. The extra level on top of that was one school that closed everything down, actually had a laundry and washing machine there. So they made that accessible to the teacher. And that teacher had a really high risk husband at home, battling cancer. So she is not, and she was a K-1 teacher. She knew she was going to have kids crying on her and bodily fluids. So end of her day, she goes down, she showers, she changes, laundry bag, come home, drop that into the laundry, and she felt safe with that. So that's the levels that you can go. I don't think that there is a need right now to be doing this. It's sort of like wiping down your groceries. I did it for 3 months and then realized, what the heck am I doing? This is really not lowering my risk. It's more making me feel better than lowering risk. So that's sort of my judgment and opinion on that.
Great. A couple of questions related to the use of fans in the classroom, and the most common example we keep hearing is about the use of box fans, but many schools have kind of the slanted windows that open, and a box fan isn't able to be mounted there too well. So what is your recommendation in that case?
Yeah, so windows open helps, but again, let's not rely on Mother Nature to provide the breeze for us. Cross ventilation is great if we can open the door and just have windows open and go, but on a still day, that doesn't work as effectively as mechanical ventilation. So if the windows open in and you can get 6 to 9 inches, there are literally fans that have been designed to fit into those spaces. You can put them in and they just blow out going that. Now, if it cranks out, we need to get a little bit more creative with what we need to do. You can essentially put a box fan, and the way that we've done this with ones that go out was I got box fans and I duct taped them up there. And then I put cardboard on the sides of it and duct taped that on. And so it was sort of blowing up and shooting out. We need to get creative when we don't have the simple solutions for it. We don't want to trade one threat for the other, like get rid of a pandemic threat and create a security issue. But we do want to get the air inside the classroom out. The other one was we took not quite the size of a box fan. It was a smaller, about 12, 18-inch fan. And we put a shroud, like a plastic wrap around it. And we just put that on the classroom on a shelf. And we ducted it into that space and just made our own duct out of what we had to actually duct it out and make sure that every drop of air getting drawn into that fan blew out this weird opening shape that we had. Get creative with how these things get put together. If you've got a good maintenance person over time, they can create some of these shrouds and shields that can do that, or unscrew and pop a window out and put wood in. I mean, I've seen it in many of your classrooms. There's window mounted AC units there. That's all you got to do with a box fan. And I mean, I know that will take longer for some schools to get to, but that's what you're trying to do.
Okay. Well, in terms of nurses' offices and isolation spaces that we all have to have set up in our schools, besides some of the things you talked about, would there be additional safety or ventilation recommendations?
Yeah, so isolation rooms, I want you to think about them just a little bit differently. You've got a number in your head that you think you're going to have in there. Make it bigger, because at the start of the school year, you're going to have every cough, every sneeze, every fever, every bellyache from every student in the school is going to get sent to your space. So if you normally had 2 students in that space, and you're working on the list of symptoms that you're identifying as potential COVID symptoms, then we have to think we're going to have a higher volume of students in that space. So now we end up the situation with multiple beds that are in there. And my scenario that I want to make sure that we avoid is a true COVID case and 2 people that just have allergies. The true COVID case infects those other 2. We don't have the space in schools to be able to have 3 or 4 separate isolation rooms. I understand and I recognize that. So what we need to do is make sure that we create safe spaces inside that isolation room. So we have one space that we have, it was a reasonably decent sized space, but we were able to put a bed, a pushboard divider another bed, pushboard divider. Another school used whiteboards, just anything that takes away the droplet risk from one student to the other. So we provide that physical barrier between them. We then need to keep them in masks, obviously, with this, but we do need to ventilate these spaces very effectively to make sure that the risk in that room gets taken out, but also the risk in that room does not put those other people at risk in that space. It is a much harder space to monitor and develop. We don't want to be working on 4 air changes per hour in that space. We don't want to be working on 6. We would prefer to be working on more to get that extra layer of safety. We don't want to work, and this is something that you need to think about. If your isolation space is on your school's HVAC system, no, because you don't want to have what's in that room being drawn out and distributed around the school. If you've got MERV 13s in there, then maybe, but it's still a really poor design. If you've got 8s, hell no, we don't want to be doing this. So that's where you take the HVAC system that you've got and block it off and put in supplemental filtration. And so again, in a room that's 10 feet by 20 feet, if you've got an isolation space that big, a rabbit air filter put in there will turn that thing over 10 to 12 times per hour. Okay, that's sort of where you want to be. But a bathroom fan, couple of them put in there, venting to outside, will also get you where you want to be.
Okay, here's a different one that I haven't heard come up over the past couple of days. So prior to this latest pandemic, there was a concern about the overuse of hand sanitizer and antibacterial soap. Do you have that concern in that we will be using those things a lot more now?
So it depends on where the concern came from. If it's a concern of toxicity and those type of things, no, I'm not concerned about it, as long as you are buying a reputable brand. There are some off-label brands with sanitizer, especially that's using methanol rather than ethanol. They do pose a hazard. Make sure you're buying those sanitizers responsibly, or do what I did, work with the people that are teaching chemistry and make it yourself. Buy a gallon of aloe, aloe from Amazon, buy your 4 liters of ethanol and make it yourself. It's great and it works well. So if we're looking from a toxicity standpoint, I'm not worried. When we start using antibacterials, we start getting into the problem of, maybe driving the evolution or selectively picking for bacteria that will be resistant to those treatments. We just have to live with that. I mean, it's a theoretical and possible threat, but I'm not too concerned with that for what we need. It's a higher risk at the moment, dealing with this. There's nothing about them that would drive or change the evolution of a virus, to the best of my knowledge. So I'm not concerned with those things at all. If I was using lots of antibiotics, that would be a different thing, but that's got nothing to do with this pandemic.
Okay. Well, in regards to students eating in the same space, whether it be a classroom or some other larger space, or even needing to drink water and would then cause to have to take the mask down. What are your recommendations for those situations?
Yeah, so let's look at risk. A person talking puts out 75 times the amount of droplets and aerosols as a person that is quietly, mouth closed, breathing. If I put a mask on that person that's talking, they're still putting out more than the person with their mouth closed, breathing. So what does that where does my assessment go with that? If we take masks off and we are not talking, we are actually presenting a quite low risk to that space. So I really don't have a problem with classrooms with the mask coming off for people to eat, as long as we can maintain a quiet time while we are eating. Somebody that takes mask off and starts chatting, that's a risk that we don't want to introduce, especially if we're not working with the 6 feet of space. Again, I don't even want to have them chatting with mask off. It's not a risk I want to have in that space. Mask off and talking, sorry. So the other option is taking them outside. If we can do that, it's obviously safer, but taking them from one space and putting them into a cafeteria then to eat is just trading one risk for the other. So it's not a risk I really love, but I also realize that it is probably the safest option with that. And if you can keep a classroom quiet, even better. If you've got somebody that can't be quiet, sit them at a wall, sit them further away, that their permanent spot ends up being away from more people. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm punishing, I'm creating a safer space. I am also a very strong advocate of mask off, mask breaks. Again, you need to work this out with your school districts. But again, a quiet student is not a risky student until they come and speak. So I don't want everybody with masks off in the classroom all the time. No, we need masks on just to provide that protection. But with a couple of schools that I've worked in, we have worked in 5-minute breaks every hour. So this is in school, like classrooms that move, as well as classrooms where the students stay in a stationary. At 9:55, the mask can be just hooked off and it's quiet reading for 5 minutes. In a class that moves to a different classroom, before they move, it's mask off for 5 minutes, a bit of quiet time, mask back on, and then they move to a different area. If you can keep it quiet, you can keep it safer. If we've got the ventilation and we've got those other aspects there. If you can't keep it quiet, they lose that. I hate to call it a privilege, but they lose that privilege from the classroom.
Looks like we're coming up on about 5 minutes left. Dr. Jameen, did you have other questions? Do you want me to keep going?
I do have other questions, but I do notice there's a common question about box fans going in the window, box fans. And the question is, how close to the window does the box fan need to be? Because I keep hearing box fan in the window. Does that mean it has to be mounted, or can it be placed in front?
So if you place it in front and you've got a screen there and gap around the outside, it's going to hit the screen and hit resistance and blow air back into your classroom.
Okay.
So what we want to do is we want to have it up against the window. We want to have it taped on or held there hard. And we want to have the sides of the window where the fan isn't blocked out. So anything that the fan is blowing, I want it blowing out and really going out into it. So I don't want a box fan at a window. Yeah, that will work, but it doesn't give you its full value. I want a box fan pushed against the opening that you've got and then sealed around the outside. If you can't push it against what you've got, then you need to put the box fan and then duct it into that space to blow out again so that it's 100% sealed. Well, not 100, but as close as you can get.
All right. Does a window AC unit compromise the air quality mitigation measures that have been put in place, since it will just simply recirculate the air in a room instead of exchanging the air in the room?
Yeah, so a window AC with nothing else is, for me, a huge no, like no. So if you want to have the window AC on, but still have your box fan in the window or whatever other mitigation, the univent going, then okay. It's really not going to give you the quality airspace that you're after in regards to cooling. But I'm sorry, cooling versus safety, I need safety. So, if you've got it sit right behind you and it's blowing on you, and then that's providing you the cooling that you need, and you've got filtration, ventilation going in the rest of the space, then sure, it's just a huge waste of energy. But a window AC by itself with a fan, like with the ventilation turned off, is just not something where we should be.
Okay, I do have a couple more questions.
I am not on a time crunch, so it's only on your end at this stage. So
okay, I'll continue with a couple more. If the staff has already been in the building without the MERV 13 filters in place, what kind of risk were they exposed to? Or
were they exposed to? Well, it all comes, so you're really low density at the moment because you don't have a lot of people there. 1 or 2 people in a classroom. Again, a little bit of a risk, but as long as you maintained your distance and mask use, the risk is really quite low. The risk from yesterday doesn't compound onto today. So if there was 5 people in your classroom and you walked it yesterday and you walk in there today, there really is no risk that you're facing, very low risk that you're facing going into there. Aerosol size stuff goes up into the air, falls at about 1 foot to 16 inches per hour. So after 8 hours, it's on the floor. And we know that the virus doesn't have a very long lifespan in the environment. So once it's on the floor, you're looking at maybe a day for it, well, about a day for it to inactivate anyway. So that type of risk, I'm not too worried about. If you opened the windows while you were working, and that was the strategy in Westport, all the teachers in there preparing, we didn't have the MERVs, we didn't have the HEPAs. It was opening the window with 1 to 2 people working in that space. As long as I worked on my distance, as long as I worked on, really de-densifying, there was only a few people in that space, the risk was really was less than going grocery shopping or going for a walk on the beach or something like that. So.
As a school social worker, I typically see students individually or in a group. Mixing and intermingling the makeup in order to best support social and emotional needs. What would your recommendation be on this?
So each school is a little different depending on the structure that you put together. But when you start thinking about this, think about the infection risk, which we should all be dividing the safest possible, interactions as possible. Distanced, masked, face shields when we need them, plexi if we're doing it with speech therapy, for example. So we should be good on the infection control side of things. Obviously, the more interactions you have, the closer they are, the longer they are, the risk does increase up. But you should be designing a system in your mind to take the risk and lower it down. Me further away, me with fewer students, those type of things. But let's think about the web that we cast with contact tracing. If I am a social worker and I go into a podded up system where each class is its own pod, and I go into that class and I provide a service in that class, and then I go into another class and provide a service, and I go into another and I do this. If a student in one class tests positive, that class goes into quarantine and I go into quarantine as the social worker, but the other classes don't go down. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But if that social worker tests positive and that social worker went into those 4 classrooms, in my opinion, each of those 4 classrooms, if you can't identify exactly all the interactions that that teacher had that were under 6 feet, then all 4 of those classrooms need to go into quarantine. Okay, so it's how you design it. So I prefer with social work, with IEPs, if we're trying to be as robust as we possibly can, we have a couple of ways of going about this. If I need to go into the classroom, I have a dedicated space in that classroom where I have the interaction, and I can guarantee that my interaction with the rest of the people in the class is greater than 6 feet away from where I am. And if that is a marked off area in the classroom, that's what it needs to be. That way you can clearly say that that teacher only had a high risk interaction with that one student. And so therefore there's not a compounding effect of a positive case. A better strategy on top of that would be to remove that student from the class and meet in a space away from it. Okay, they sort of work together, either one of those. So let's think about what happens. Again, if that class tests, one person in that class tests positive, the student that got the service is out as well as the teacher is out. We can't get away from that, but none of the other classes are there. But if the teacher is the one that tests positive, and we've designed a classroom space where every interaction except for one was further than 6 feet, then if that teacher tests positive, only the students that you provided services to need to come out with contact tracing. Okay, so that means that if I were 4 classrooms and provided services to 4 students, it's the teacher plus 4 students. So if we bring them out, it's only 4. If we go in and design it so that there is no interaction with anybody else, it's only 4. But if we go into the classroom and there's mixing and mingling, you don't know who it is. And so now it's 4 classrooms. So design it effectively based on both infection control, but also contact tracing, so that the web that is cast, the net that is cast over people in regards to contact tracing, is as small as humanly possible.
Thank you. Can you explain where to put a fan that is safe and where not to put a fan? They're asking, is there a diagram of how the fan should be placed? And the comment is, I see fans in middle of hallways and in doorways entering classrooms, and I've read research that says this is wrong.
Yeah, we do not want a fan that blows air from one student or one teacher to another. Okay, that's bad design. So putting a fan in a door that the student that's sitting at the door, if they're the one that's infected, we're just blowing it all over everybody else. We want gentle breeze. We want it sort of uniform in the way in which it goes. So that's why I don't want a fan in the window of a classroom facing in, because I am then directing air in a tunnel and I'm shooting it everywhere. And I really don't want to have that type of design. A fan in a hallway, you only need to do that, and I don't think you do, is if you're not using that system of drawing air down the hallway and into the classrooms. It'll do it its own way. So what we don't want with fans just in general is we don't want a fan that is at face-ish level blowing from one person onto others. If we need to circulate the air in the classroom, have them either low or have them high to circulate the air above face or below face level. We just don't want to be blowing on other people.
Okay, so we do have a time crunch. I am being asked to wrap this up. We do have additional questions that were not answered. So as yesterday, would you like me to send them to you?
Yeah, so
okay.
I mean, if you can bundle them up into, like units,
Okay.
and then I will try to get to them and get to you. It may be this weekend before I do get them to you. But I really want to get to those questions and the answers to those where I can possibly help.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Bromage. And on behalf of all the East Bay superintendents and the teachers, we really appreciate your time and going overtime for us today to help answer the many questions we have. And I'm sure today's session has brought a lot of other questions to people's minds. So on behalf of the East Bay superintendents, thank you very much. I'm going to now hand it back to Dr. Kenworthy. Our number one goal is to keep everyone healthy and safe and to only re-enter if it is safe for our teachers. So Dr. Kenworthy.
Thank you, Dr. Jermaine. I certainly echo all of everything Dr. Jermaine said there. Just wanted to remind everyone that this session will be recorded and able to be viewed on the Portsmouth YouTube channel. I'll make sure that all the East Bay superintendents have that link, as well as yesterday's session is already up there. So a lot of the same, but some different questions that came up there as well. So thank you, everyone, and thank you again to Dr. Bromage.
Thank you, Dr. Bromage.
You are most welcome. Have a great day, everybody.
You too. Thank you.